1587. The return in 1587, a new group set out. This time there were no soldiers. There were families, women, children, babies, a total of 117 people. This was no longer a military outpost. It was going to be a city. This detail was very important because for the first time in history, people were traveling to an unknown continent with no intention of ever returning. As the ships crossed the Atlantic, everyone shared the same dream. Their own homes, their own land, a new life. But no one asked the real question, what if this land does not want us? One detail changes everything. The man appointed to lead the colony was John White. He was experienced, but his most important trait was this. His family was with him. In fact, a baby was born in Roanoke, a name that entered history, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America. She was the symbol of permanence. But sometimes history loves symbols and then destroys them mercilessly. The first days of silent tension. When the colonists arrived on the island, everything felt strange. Nature was beautiful, the land seemed fertile, but there was an unsettling silence. The native tribes were watching from a distance. They did not approach, but they did not leave either. And even stranger, there was no trace of the first colony founded in 1585. The houses were destroyed, the belongings were gone, but there were no signs of battle. This made some colonists uneasy, but most thought, we are different. This time we will succeed. This is how people usually ignore danger. Problems began. Quickly weeks passed, and reality slowly revealed itself. Food was scarce. The land was harder to survive on than expected. Relations with the natives were tense. A misunderstanding, an attack, a retaliation, and the situation escalated rapidly. The colonists realized they could not survive without help. A decision was made. John White would return to England, but no one could predict the consequences of this decision. The farewell. As White left the colony, he said, I will return as soon as possible. The colonists trusted him. Before leaving, an agreement was made. If the colony was forced to relocate, they would carve the name of the new location into a tree, and if they were in danger, they would carve a cross beside the name. This rule was very clear, and at that moment, the Roanoke colony was left alone with its fate. But White could not return. What White meant by as soon as possible would take 3 years, because Europe was in turmoil. England was at war with Spain. Ships were being used for military purposes. Roanoke was no one's priority. And at that moment, the Roanoke colony was left alone with its fate. But White could not return. What White meant by as soon as possible would take 3 years, because Europe was in turmoil. England was at war with Spain. Ships were being used for military purposes. Roanoke was no one's priority. For 3 years, no news arrived, no ships docked, no messages came. 117 people, completely cut off from the world. No help, no orders, no hope. And today we do not know. How did they survive the first winter? Did they starve? Did they turn on each other? Did they join the native tribes? Or did something much darker happen? The return in 1590, John White finally returned. As his ship approached the island, his heart was racing. But what awaited him was something no human ever wants to see. But we are not telling that moment yet. The return in 1590, John White finally returned. As his ship approached the island, his heart was racing. But what awaited him was something no human ever wants to see. But we are not telling that moment yet. Signs within the silence. When John White's ship left Roanoke Island, no one thought it might be a farewell. But every sail that disappears at sea sometimes never returns. For the 117 people left behind, time began to move differently. Days, weeks, and months blurred together. And during this period, one of history's most terrifying silences began. The first winter arrived earlier than expected. Roanoke Island was nothing like Europe. The weather was harsher, the humidity heavier, and food sources limited. At first, the colonists were hopeful, but time revealed the truth. Hunting became difficult, crops failed, fish were not caught every day, and when people are hungry, they stop thinking rationally. At this point, history goes silent. There are no diaries, no letters, no records. But one thing is certain. These people were alone. A thin line with the native tribes. Native tribes lived around Roanoke. Some were friendly, others were distant. The conflicts of the first colony were still remembered. Trust was fragile, but hunger is stronger than pride. To survive, the colonists had to trade with the natives. This trade involved food in exchange for metal, tools in exchange for cloth. But this balance was delicate. One misunderstanding, one spark, could set everything on fire. And we do not know whether that spark was ever lit. Tension inside the colony. External threats were not the only danger. Internal tension was growing. 117 people, confined, under constant stress. This is a situation ready to explode. Who was in charge? Who made decisions? Who could be trusted? Some colonists were rumored to consider leaving the colony to join native tribes. Was this an escape or a conscious choice? We do not know. The ship never came. Months passed. White still did not return. Every shadow on the horizon, every wave, every cry of a seagull raised the same question. Is that a ship? But nothing ever arrived. And eventually people began asking the most dangerous question of all. Have they forgotten us? This is the question that destroys a colony from within. Change a plan? The colonists had a plan. If conditions worsen, they would relocate to a safer place. Nearby islands, the mainland, areas inhabited by native tribes. This was not an escape. It was a survival plan. But was it carried out? And if it was, why was no record left behind? The name CROATOAN. This name was not unfamiliar to the colonists. CROATOAN was an island and the name of a native tribe. Some colonists had good relations with this tribe. So why was this name important? Because years later, this word would appear in one of the most chilling contexts in history. But we are not there yet. The possibility of disease. Another dark possibility existed. Disease. Europeans had no immunity in the New World. Even minor infections could be deadly. If an epidemic broke out, the colony could have collapsed rapidly. But again, the same question remains. Why were no bodies found? No graves, no traces. Disease leaves marks, but Roanoke left none. Were the traces hidden on purpose? Some historians believe the colonists deliberately erased their traces. Why? 2. Protect themselves from hostile tribes, or escape a greater threat. This theory sounds extreme, but the cleanliness of the disappearance is difficult to explain otherwise. Houses seemed dismantled. Belongings appeared relocated. Nothing looked abandoned in haste. This did not look like a panic. It looked like a relocation. But who were they running from? And time was running out. As years passed, everyone in the colony had to make a decision. Stay, leave, trust whom, and most importantly, if we leave, will anyone ever find us? They would never know the answer. The calm before the storm summer of 1590, John White was finally returning, but he did not know this. Roanoke was no longer the same Roanoke. What awaited him was not a welcome, not a cry for help, not a sign of life, only emptiness. But the real shock was yet to come. When White stepped onto the shore, the first thing he saw would change everything. And in that moment, he would encounter the most famous word in history. Where did these people really go? The empty city. A hot summer day in 1590, John White's ship approached the shores of Roanoke Island after 3 years. For White, this was salvation. For the colonists, it may have already been too late. White stood on the deck, his eyes fixed on the shore. He expected to see smoke, movement, a sign, but there was nothing. Silence. When the ship docked, the first thing felt was silence. Even the birds were quiet. The wind moved through the trees, but there was no human sound. White stepped onto land, and the first thing he realized was this: the colony was there, but the people were gone. Abandoned houses. The houses were not destroyed, not burned. There were no signs of war, but they were empty. Doors were open, no one inside. Some houses looked as if they had been calmly abandoned. This was important, because there was no panic, no chaos, no belongings left behind in haste. This was not the aftermath of a disaster. This was a deliberate departure. Where were the belongings? White searched house after house. Weapons were gone. Food containers were gone. Most tools were missing. But strangely, some worthless items, broken objects remained, as if people had taken everything they needed, which meant one thing: they decided to leave. But where? Ain't no bodies. Perhaps the most disturbing detail: no graves, no bones, not a single body. 117 people. If they had been attacked, there would be traces. If they had starved, there would be traces. If disease had struck, there would be traces. But there were none. This meant this was not an ordinary event. The carved word. And then, White could not believe his eyes. Carved into the trunk of a tree, in large letters, was a single word: CROATOAN. This word was part of the plan. If the colony relocated, they were supposed to carve the destination. But White searched for something else: a cross. If they were in danger, a cross would be carved beside the word. But there was none. What did this mean? A message or a cry for help? CROATOAN was a message. But what kind of message? We went here. We are safe. Or come find us. For White, it was a fragment of hope. CROATOAN Island was about 80 kilometers away, and a native tribe lived there. If the colonists went there, maybe they were still alive. But White had no time. A tragic decision. White wanted to go to CROATOAN, but nature refused. A violent storm broke out. Ships were damaged. The crew panicked, and White made the heaviest decision of his life. He had to return, without searching, without answers, without the truth. The last sight, as White left Roanoke, he looked back one last time. Empty houses, silent shores, trees swaying in the wind. And he did not know this. This was the last time he would ever see them. He would never return. History falls silent after 1590. There were no official records about the Roanoke colony, no searches, no investigations, no demands for answers. 117 people erased from history as if they had never existed. But the mystery remained. The word CROATOAN became both a key and a lock for historians because it raised the same questions: salvation, trap, or the beginning of something far darker. These questions have been asked for centuries. Time to face the truth. What we have now: an empty colony, a single carved word, countless theories, and in the final part, we will examine the strongest of those theories and perhaps the most disturbing one. Truths, theories, and lost people. After 1590, Roanoke sank into silence, but that silence became the beginning of a debate lasting centuries. 117 people, no bodies, no graves, no witnesses. Only one word remained. Theory 1. They joined the native tribe. The most hopeful theory: the CROATOAN tribe had friendly relations with the colonists. Historians believe they ran out of food. They realized help would never come and chose survival. Why does this make sense? No signs of war, no panic, belongings taken intentionally. But one major question remains: why were no clear English traces found? Theory 2. They were taken by force. A darker possibility: some tribes viewed Europeans as a threat. Possibly, a night raid occurred. Colonists were scattered. They were taken by force. But again, a problem: such an attack leaves blood, bodies, destruction. None were found. Theory 3. Starvation and dispersal. The colony slowly collapsed. People left in small groups, some north, some south. But in the 16th century, unknown lands, hostile tribes, disease survival alone was nearly impossible. The question remains, did 117 people give up at the same time? Theory 4, Spanish intervention. Spain did not want England to colonize. Some believe Spanish soldiers destroyed the colony, left no witnesses, but archaeology does not support this. No bullets, no weapons. Clues from modern science, later excavations revealed English-style pottery, European tools, DNA traces resembling English ancestry. This strengthened one possibility. The colonists may have merged with native tribes, but it still does not explain everything. The most disturbing truth, perhaps the darkest possibility, they survived, but they abandoned being English. A new identity, a new life, total separation from the old world. In that case, what made them lost was not death, but being forgotten. Why this story still matters? Because Roanoke reminds us, history does not always give answers. Sometimes people disappear without dying, are erased without destruction, and only questions remain. The final question, close your eyes. You are in a new land with your family. You realize help will never come. Two choices, die or leave everything behind. Erase your identity. Which would you choose? The legacy of Roanoke. The Roanoke colony is history's first great lost city, and perhaps the most human one. Because the mystery is not monsters or aliens. The mystery is the human instinct to survive. And perhaps the truth is this: the people of Roanoke did not disappear. They simply left us behind.